Hello. Thank you very much for joining us at Clibden today. I'm very glad to see you all here. And I'm very glad to be joined by this brilliant panel. My name is James Marriott. I'm a columnist at the Times newspaper. And today we are here to talk about technology. Our question, the question we've been set is, will the advance of technology make or break us? Recent years have seen a blistering pace of change, advances in AI and social media, the growth of short-form video, large language models. The digital world looks very different now to how it did 10 years ago. And I guess we're sort of going to mull over whether our future is going to be more dynamic and connected than ever before, or whether we're all going to be addicted to TikTok, alone in our bedrooms, consuming AI slop. So to consider these two rival visions of the future, I'm very glad to be joined by the writer Rachel Kelly, author of The Gift of Teenagers, the historian Luke Pepperer, the author of Motherland, the author and speaker Mina Salami, whose book is Can Feminism Be African, and the historian and broadcaster Alice Loxton. His latest book is called Eleanor, who's also known on TikTok as History Alice. So thanks very much all for joining me. I wanted to begin by putting a question to each of you, which is the thought of our technological future. Is it keeping you awake at night in terror? Or are you bouncing out of bed every morning filled with optimism and hope for the changes that tech is going to unleash upon our lives? I'll start with you and then we'll go this way, which is left to right, I think.
Be neither.
Yeah, you can be neither. You can be somewhere in the middle.
So I'm on the optimistic side. I'm on the hopeful side.
Good. And what would you say is your main cause for optimism?
Because I think when we're talking about technology, whether that's social media or AI, we bring ourselves as humans first to technology. And I have a sort of profound belief in our power as humans to seek out, in the end, what is good for us. So I think that's why I'm kind of optimistic. I understand the concept that technology might run away with us, but if we preserve that human connection, I think we're going to be okay.
Interesting. Luke, what's your
I think Rachel's absolutely correct there. There is I think the power of the human mind, the power of the human spirit will overcome a lot of the challenges that are being posed or that we think are being posed by the technology that exists. I'm mostly optimistic about technology in general and do utilize it quite a lot, but everything from and I think it's interesting because now we're in an age where when we're talking about technology, I think artificial intelligence seems to encapsulate that. We all use technology in different ways in order to enhance our lives. And this is sort of links back to Rachel's point, is that our starting point, and I think the starting point for most people is how can I use this to enhance my life, or automatically we'll be using it to advance our life. There is this indication that from especially the developers of certain artificial intelligence models, that they will be able to dictate or predict how people are going to use the technologies. And I think that's, incorrect. Actually, a lot of these things, it's impossible to predict how people use them. It's impossible to predict that scope and scale of human creativity. And it tends to, I think it tends towards towards the positive in terms of how people seek to apply the technology. And that's because everyone's thinking about, even if it's more selfish or egotistic about how can I make my life better, it's tending towards making things better to a certain extent in terms of the utilization of technology. So I'm generally optimistic.
Good. We've got so much optimism. Liz, are you also optimistic?
Well, the question was, does it keep you up at night?
Yeah.
I don't think it does. But I think I have an unusual career, I suppose. I was at uni less than probably 7 years ago now. And the job that I do now did not exist. It couldn't possibly have existed because of the transformation of Instagram and TikTok and things like that. And so I'm very used, and social media has come very, very quickly in its form. I think it was only 5 years ago that you could only post pictures on Instagram. And it was a moment where they suddenly said you could do videos, which has completely transformed it. These are like little TV channels in their own right now. But I'm also very aware of the fact that that might disappear as quickly as it came. So So I think I probably have an unusual approach in perhaps ways that hasn't always been like that before, maybe in decades gone past when people were writers or creating TV, in that I am very used to every year a new development, a new kind of challenge. We have all these meetings with Meta, and they always introduce new features. Every time we go in, they're like, oh, now you can message these people in certain ways. Now you can have this kind of content. So they're changing it all the time. And I'm pretty sure that I suppose it makes me, I guess I've been like trained to think in a way that everything will probably change. And I'm sure the whole landscape of social media will be completely different, might not exist. TikTok might not exist. Instagram might be completely unrecognizable to what it is now. So I suppose I'm very reactive and very prepared for that. And I mean, from my point of view, social media has been a wonderful thing as a creator, from a creator's point of view. And I'm sure Rachel might have different views, when you think about consumers of social media. But it has been a really, really wonderful thing in diversifying social media, like, talking about, in my case, history. And it's very freeing, it's very creative. But yeah, no, it doesn't keep me up at night.
Good. My God, this is going to be a very cheerful panel. Mina, do you want to bring a note of pessimism?
I do, yeah.
Good.
It does keep me up at night, and I'm very pessimistic, I would say, about actually the development of technology at the moment. I'm not a technophobe, so I absolutely think that artificial intelligence is potentially something that we could use to our advantage as a species. But when you just look at what is actually happening already, we're seeing a lot of polarization thanks to both social media and artificial intelligence. We're seeing a lot of mental health problems being raised. I think, it has doubled, especially with young people. There's this kind of epistemic fog. People are confused about what is true and what is false. But worst of all, there's the threat of actual extinction. So at the moment, we're using a kind of what's the word? I forget what it's actually called, but the AI models that we use at the moment are a kind of primitive model. And all the big tech people are working towards what is called artificial general intelligence, which will be much more autonomous. And once we get that, we have the potential of AI making decisions on its own because it has been prompted to do that, and those decisions may even lead to the extinction of humanity. And it's kind of interesting because I think it's about 30% of AI engineers are themselves, in many surveys that have now been carried out by major institutions across the world, saying that we need to pause the development of AGI. Like this will lead to human extinction, and yet people are not listening, and that's a very big percentage. I mean, imagine if 30% of pilot engineers or something were saying that flights are not safe. We would not be stepping onto the plane. So yeah, I definitely worry a lot about that.
Brilliant. Well, I think your pessimism is alone outbalanced the optimism of the rest of the panel. I think AI is an interesting place to start. And I guess all of you are in your way creatives, creating, writing, videos. Do you worry that you could be replaced? We have AI writing, we have AI influencers. Is this something that bothers you? Luke, you're grimacing in a nervous manner.
No, I'm not grimacing nervous man at all. In fact, I'm quite confident. I mean, for what I do in terms of from history, artificial intelligence, and it can also be coming in this, also writing about Africa. So a lot of our, at least a lot of what I do, a lot of knowledge, a lot of African knowledge isn't really on the internet. It's not contained on the internet. It's contained in the minds, the souls, and the spirits of people. So AI can't eat that, and it can't replicate that. You have to speak to human beings in order to understand. I think actually, or I don't think this just applies to African history, but definitely when it comes to African history, the information doesn't exist online. So it's for artificial intelligence machines which rely on absorbing and then regurgitating information. I think that not even paying attention, I think, to source, which is what makes me feel safe as a historian anyway. I mean, Mina sort of alluded to this, our difficulty we have the distinction of now between truth and lies. I think one of the issues that I see potentially happening with artificial intelligence, and that I feel is actually even affecting me personally, so sort of becoming a little bit of an Ouroboros, is that actually when you look at something online, I actually initially tend towards skepticism as soon as I see something. and will look for other sources in order to confirm whether or not, even if it's just an artificial intelligence, what is telling me it's true. I mean, nowadays you have no choice when you Google something that they give you the AI overview. It's not that it's necessarily wrong, but it's just that you can't tell. Unless you're following it blindly. But so with regards to history, even if I was using artificial intelligence, my indication would be to go to speak again to a person and say, is this, you'd have to look at another source anyway in order to verify, is this, because there would be no point in looking at another artificial intelligence model to tell you one artificial intelligence model is wrong. I'd be looking at go to a person and asking, does this seem right to you? And even when it comes to, like I said, African history, you'd have to go to people, you'd have to go to the storytellers in Ghana. We have the Ochiami, the people who are the keepers of, of the law, of our history. You have to look at the architecture, you have to look at the tiny details, in a shrine in the middle of a forest in order to figure out what is it these actual people actually believe and think, etc. And then you have to connect that to human experience, and you have to think about, well, how did that change, historically, how are things evolving now?
Yeah.
So it's just, there are a lot of factors, and a lot of factors that relies on human relationships and human connections even to find it. So as an African historian, and as a historian generally, I'm not worried in the slightest, actually.
Good. Historians could be more important than ever. They could, right?
Slowly working towards.
One thing that's worth saying about technology is the clock in the stage isn't working. So I don't know if anyone can fix it. If someone shouts at me when we've run out of time, because I also left my phone in the taxi on the way here, so I'm way of telling what the time is. I know this, just in case I was working now. Alice, do you...
Can I be replaced?
Can you be replaced as a writer and as a creator of videos? Does it matter if a book or a video is made by an AI, not by a person?
Okay, so on my social media channels, I go and film me on historic locations like Windsor Castle recently, or places like Cliveden, and I will do a 1-2 minute video explaining the history. And the whole goal is to get people excited to visit historic locations everywhere, wherever they live in the country. And for me, that's quite hard because obviously you've got to try and get everywhere. And I was thinking about this, what if they could make an AI version of me and I could just commission like all of these videos about historic locations in every part of the country? And wouldn't that be wonderful, because it would get everyone excited about their local history across, everywhere. And that's if you were going to go all out behind it. But I just don't think it would be possible, because okay, if I might go to somewhere that's like a historic church. I mean, it's the same sort of thing as what you're saying about research, is that if I was going to film a historic church in the middle of nowhere, it might never have been filmed before. So you couldn't possibly create it. You have to just go there and film it. The other thing is that I think people wouldn't engage with it so much. Even if it was visually looked convincing, they wouldn't engage with it when they knew that I hadn't actually been there. And I think that's what AI, that's the kind of bit it cuts out, is the reality of knowing that that person has actually done that thing. And it's like the human achievement, and people come up to me all the time being like, I'm so excited that you went to ... this location, and that's my hometown. And if they suddenly knew that I hadn't been there and it was just a machine, even if it was totally convincing, I think it would lose its whole magic. So I think AI can do a pretty good job at replicating things, but I think, and I know people say it grows quickly and these things change quickly, but I just don't think it can ever actually replicate the real thing. And I think we're beginning to see it. It's an interesting thing on social media. You guys know what ASMR is. I don't have to explain that to you, but like they create these videos. I'm gonna have to explain it to you, James. I don't know. All right.
Despite not having a phone, I know ASMR.
Yeah, and so we see ASMR where they make those, like, I saw this thing the other day where it was like jelly keyboard ASMR, and that was the AI video. But then people have started to create in real life the AI video. So people make a real jelly keyboard and make videos about that. So it's like humans creating videos as if it's AI. So it's like coming full circle.
Already. It's only been 3 years and they're in game.
Yeah, so I suppose if you think AI is like a style or like a genre, then you can perform in AI style, or you can make an AI video in real life, which kind of indicates that it is such a style at the moment that you can't, that it's too recognizable. It's so obvious, to blend in with the real thing. Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see though. Fingers crossed.
Like there's a bit of a distinction. It's such a big topic, technology, and AI is one topic, and social media and how that's working in terms. I think there is a danger on social media with using technology to flood someone's feed with 30,000 messages and create avatars, and it's slightly different from someone stepping in and creating content. It's a sort of that I think is a bit more of a worrying use of
Yes.
AI in that sense. But just to your point, and I'm naturally very interested in the links between mental health and social media use. And there's just a couple of points there, because I think that causation can be really simplistic, and to go from social media for sure causes mental health problems in young people. There's a few problems which I think is well worth remembering. So first of all, lots of mental health problems in young people predated the explosion in social media. And even people like Jonathan Haidt, who've done a lot of work in the field, there is a confusion between correlation and causation, exactly what's going on. And I think when we're thinking more broadly about mental health, lots of things go into good mental health, and equally lots of things go into poor mental health. And social media may well play a kind of exacerbating factor, but I think it's very important to think of all the other things which are there, rather than just simply kind of nailing it on social media. So yeah, just making that kind of distinction between these different sorts of technology.
Yes, totally. Although I guess one argument might be that AI and social media, having started off as very different
They're coming
phenomena,
together now.
are sort of coming together because a lot of social media is just filled with AI slop. And I was wondering, Minna, you're very pessimistic, as I agree with you, about the imminent extinction of humanity by robots. But do you also worry about the more immediate, I guess, more mundane problem that AI is just generating an awful lot of slop, and people are just spending their lives looking at, bizarre videos of. Has anyone seen the video of the large lady dropping an enormous rock on a glass bridge? Has anyone seen this? It's proliferating, at least on my social media feeds. It's very good. But do you worry about this sort of degradation of the kind of content that we're consuming before we get to being wiped out by robots?
Absolutely. And the two are tied together, because the more we're consuming this kind of slop, the less we can focus on the more imminent risks that AI presents us with. I haven't seen that particular video, but
It's actually quite good.
yeah, I think, this is the thing, that it really, at the moment anyways, producing a lot of very low quality, whether it's content or data even, and I think related to this question of, can it replace us? It's a very important question, because it's causing so much panic. And of course, there are some jobs, there are many jobs, in fact, that AI probably can substitute. But for the most part, we need to make the distinction between the intensification and perfection of rational thinking, and logic and deduction and things like that, which AI is very good at doing. But knowledge and intelligence and creation, which is what, as writers and creatives we do, AI is not very good at those things. There are many different ways of knowing. So yes, we think rationally, and our educational system has typically taught us rather to put that, to rank rational thinking highest, which is why we have this problem now. But of course, we also are beings who know through our emotions. We have emotional intelligence. We know through intuition. We know through our bodies. There are so many ways in which we know, which AI has not a clue about. And so, and those more irrational, mystical ways of knowing are ways that are very present when I'm writing. And I know this is true for many writers. You hear writers say, when you're in the flow, you don't know where the words are coming from. They're coming from some sort of unknown source. So I see no reason to fear that a technology that is strictly good at binary code, that has to do with logic and deduction and rationality, would be able to perform better at a skill like writing, for example, which involves all of these many different ways of knowing.
That's very interesting. I'm interested to know if any of you use AI in your day-to-day jobs as writers and creators, and if so, how?
I mean, I don't know where AI starts, and I don't really quite know the definition of what it is. And sometimes I think, when you do a Google search with AI, that seems quite similar to kind of other technologies. But I mean, I think there are say the history world, and it actually goes again back to your point, Luke, about how technology has transformed how you write about history in some quite basic ways. For example, all the newspapers are now online. So you can now search all the newspapers. So you could search a name. Like I read a book about someone called James Gilray, and you could just put in Gilray and put in the time that he was alive, and it would come out with every single mention of him. And it's so easy to use. You get results in seconds, and you can trawl through the original, photograph, the scanned-in version of the Times from, I don't know, 1810 or wherever it might be. That is an amazing thing. And in the past, you'd have had to go somewhere like the London Library, you'd have to go down and you'd have to trawl through, and it would be so time intensive. And you just think, imagine if all of the archives were digitized. It would, so digitization has been an amazing thing. I know that's slightly different to AI, but the technology has helped us a huge amount with research, and obviously that's not the final product. But I don't think I'd have been able to write some of my work without that digital development. So that was definitely a good thing.
Well, I think that's to sort of building upon that point. It's that it sort of goes to what maybe Rich and I were saying earlier about sort of the utilization of technology. So when it comes to the digitization, we're using it as a tool. I think what's interesting, at least sometimes some people feels about the artificial intelligence argument, is that there is a sense of having the technology do the thing for us rather than helping us do the thing that we want to do, and which is where I think all this talk of replacement comes into that. But I think there are still some fundamental skills and knowledge. It's like the technology, it says the digitization, for example, of archives exist. You can read some medieval archives. If you don't know how to, and you can now use technology for this, but things like translating, again, something like Old English or translating a certain language, even from historically, but more importantly, when it comes to historical stories, historical archives, and history in general, understanding the human drama that is actually the engine of history. Because, and I think, in fact, sort of linking to what Minna was saying about rationalization, history, I think we thought about history, writing, storytelling, these aren't factual, rational, objective things. They are subjective, they are mellifluous. Even when you're reading history, you have to think about the human relationships and the human drama involved in this. That person did that action which caused that event because he was interested in this person or wanted this to happen, etc. There's actually a lot of human context which happens, and in fact, actually just talking about the events linearly will actually give you a poor understanding of history and a poor understanding of the context and a poor understanding of the events. So despite using the technology to advantage, you have to have some fundamental skills, some fundamental understandings, and actually a fundamental understanding. And this is why I actually think historians get better and writers get better the older they get. And that's because they've had more experience of what it means to be human. And that's actually why writers are better ordered. And it's in fact quite difficult to be a young writer because your experience of the world, your experience of humanity is limited in comparison. So you just don't have that same scope of understanding why people do certain things. And if you can't, to what extent will, in this case, artificial intelligence be able to understand human dynamics to the extent that it'll be able to completely replace writers, creatives, artists in order to do exactly what they do at the same level with the same fundamentals and understanding. That's something that's not quite clear to me. And I don't know what kind of exponential development it would take for that to be the case. And people say, well, this can happen in 5 years, 10 years, etc. Perhaps technology moves at a quicker pace, but let's not forget, we, even as a species, have had, well, at least as far as, our forms are now, millions, hundreds of thousands of years to millions of years of development to become all worse. So there, we have also, and actually every creature is something that's also developed as well over time, over permutations and mutations, etc. And there's a complexity there that we don't fully understand. And I think we trick ourselves into thinking that we can understand yet. Yes. I mean, Somerset, so just quickly, Somerset Maugham had a really interesting quote talk about writing and storytelling. He said there are three rules to writing a successful, 3 steps to writing a successful book. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. But, it's just that it is, there is an alchemy to it. We can understand something, when it's good, but, rationalizing how and why something works and what doesn't. And even sometimes if you understand that on a rational level, applying it is a completely different beast. You can understand all the rules of how to create something good, if you've not practiced that thing, it's very unlikely you'll be able to create something on that level. So there are loads of different elements that I think go into it, which again, a lot of people who, a lot of people who are developing this technology, thinking about these technology, I mean, I don't think that they are, I don't know how culture generally, a lot of them are, how well versed in art and how interested in art that they are in order to think that what they're creating can replace art. This is really now.
But isn't there, even if you could create, even if AI, you could have trained AI to write Motherland, it's still lacking, because I feel like the knowing that there is an author behind it adds so much to it. I think that's almost, the kind of knowledge that and another person has created this work is, for me, quite an important part of it. So when you go and think about, you read like Simon Sebag Montefiore's books, the fact that you know that he has written that and like one man has written that and kind of put that all together, I find that that improves the kind of reading of it so much. It's the same as, I guess, like Olympians. I'm sure that technology could make a robot that does the long jump like that. But the fact that we are so impressed by ordinary people being able to use their brain or use their body in certain ways, that kind of makes it much more, brings it to that next level.
I think it's a good point. I'm always worried by, I don't know if anybody uses a blogging platform called Substack, but I see a lot of writing that is patently AI generated, performing very well, and people love it and it goes viral. Are you persuaded by these arguments you're about to?
Well, no, I was just going to jump in because I think, in a way, perhaps what we're all saying is there's something about experience and expertise, and they've got the same root as a word. And there's something there about a kind of imagination, wisdom, understanding what it is to be human, and that all of us are bringing that to sources and making sense of it. So, in my field, AI is extremely useful to be able to look at primary research
Yes.
and what people have found in my field of adolescent mental health. But I then have to understand it. And just because people have done some research or they've got some letters after their name, I feel what I could add is that I may or may not agree with it. So that is to do with expertise coming from experience. And I really liked your point that when you're older, perhaps you're wiser. But I mean, I'm 60, and I think there is a kind of lived life which informs one's understanding of anything that AI can throw up.
There's interesting research to show that when AI is introduced in hospitals, it makes human doctors worse because they over-rely on it, and the AI obviously is imperfect. I guess the other to bring the conversation back to the other part of it, which is smartphones, social media, mental health. We've talked a lot about using AI as a tool, and I think I'm always skeptical of this idea that smartphones are neutral tools that you just have to know how to use. I wonder if you were talking to teenagers or parents about smartphones and mental health, would you tell them a smartphone is just a neutral tool and you've got to learn how to use it? Or do you think it is designed in a particular way to produce certain behaviors, and it might be worth bearing in mind that technology has been designed in a particular way?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. I mean, kind of knowledge is power. So, of course, it's a good idea. But to understand how algorithms work and how you get fed more of the same stuff, et cetera, et cetera. I think that it's interesting. So when I'm working with groups of parents are much, much more worried about social media than young people themselves. So if you ask a group of young people, and perhaps a quick show of hands, young people themselves are not as worried as we. Well, you're not. Maybe, are you a parent?
No, I'm not. I'm not even young anymore either.
Okay. But it's roughly, 50 to 60% of parents are very worried, and 10 to 20% of young people are worried, which I think is quite sort of encouraging in a way that young people themselves can be quite kind of savvy about what social media is doing. And there's a really positive thing that the great characteristic of adolescence and what's happening to the teenage brain is this huge desire for autonomy. And notwithstanding some of the challenges of social media, that seems to be quite a kind of optimistic thing that's happening, which is that young people don't want to be told what to do or think. And they're perfectly well aware that their data is being mined and how the system works. I bet everybody in this room, you're all pretty savvy on the system. So I think there's just to bear that in mind, that sometimes it's something we worry more about than young people themselves.
Interesting. Minna, as our pessimist, are you Are you persuaded by this optimistic argument about smartphones?
Unfortunately, I'm not. No, and I come across a lot of research that's being done, and also speak with young people, and so many are saying that they would rather not have their smartphones with them, and that they feel almost, kind of persecuted by them. And there's like all these new spaces that are smartphone free, nightclubs, restaurants, book clubs. So you can really feel that there's something in the zeitgeist where and not only young people, I mean, generally, 70% of people don't want the development of AI to continue without a pause. So that's a huge number of people. And I'm sure many of those are also young.
It's like they're all a cause for optimism. The fact that they're not drinking the Kool-Aid in the same way.
Absolutely. I mean, that is a cause for optimism, I think, but that's not the direction that we're moving. We're getting more AI, more social media platforms. I do want to say, though, that because I do use Substack, that it is actually the platform. I mean, it's still social media and it has its pitfalls, because we're all ultimately there to help these companies make a profit, right? So like they're never going to be about social connection as much as they're going to be about making profits. But Substack actually is, for me anyway, in my view, a place where individual voices get more attention, and it feels sort of less algorithmed than the other platforms. But yeah, I do feel a lot of concern about how smartphones are impacting younger generation.
I share that concern, and I think one of the things that often gets chucked at you as a skeptic of smartphones is that you're a Luddite. Do you think it makes you a Luddite to object to new technology?
No, because I love new technology. I'm someone who's very interested in philosophy and science and everything that can help us to understand who we are as a species and our ecosystems as well. So I get really excited about new technology, but what I have an issue with is the ideology behind these technologies, which is an ideology that is pushing, hyper capitalism, oligarchy, even autocratic values. We're seeing an erosion of democracy. All of these huge political and social questions are not divorced from the way in which we as individuals use social media or AI.
Yeah, I agree with Min actually, in the sense that, I think as soon as, the people who kind of brand themselves as being, tech savvy ahead of technology are those who just, sometimes, the ones who brand themselves is because they, adopt or want to be ahead of every single technology that pops up. And I think, to actually be someone who's technologically savvy is to understand, I think, one, the meaning behind the technologies, but two, the utilization behind those technologies as well. And I actually think being skeptical, not skeptical for technology per se, but, if your first instinct is to be like, well, that's interesting, how could I apply that, etc., before using it, I think makes you the opposite of a Luddite as well. And in fact, the most technologically sort of savvy people I know, well, one of whom actually happens to be, my father, especially in the area of like home care, home automation, was doing things that were 20 years ahead of his time. And he has always been the first person to tell me, be careful about how you utilize and apply these things, because, not all of them are useful. In fact, and a lot of technologies are developed, as Mina says, by a company in order for them to make a profit. They're not necessarily. So you have to think about, how's this going to work for me, or, how's this going to improve my life? And for me, that's the fundamental aspect and truth about technology. It's supposed to be something that enhances one's life, no matter what it is. That's why, again, I think, and again, we've been talking a lot about electronic technology, about smartphones, about artificial intelligence, about the social media. But I mean, one of the most impactful technologies in the world was writing, the ability to put your thoughts down on paper and to communicate, to have something that's there as objective reality. Also, writing in general, and sort of crafts used for writing as well. Even earlier than that, stone axes that help to cut your meat slightly faster. That was a massive technology. In fact, the technology that probably led us to being, who we are. Because share certain parts of meat, and you could support a larger population, all these kinds of things. So But again, I think it's that putting that emphasis on the utilization first is, I think, what makes you technologically savvy rather than adopting every little thing that comes up, because so many technologies come up and are useless. It's funny, I was watching once an early episode, an early episode 2020 of Shark Tank, actually, and one of the entrepreneurs was like, someone came pitching NFTs, and one of the entrepreneurs is like, yeah, NFTs really interesting. I'm sure they're going to be a massive thing in 5 to 10 years, but it's just like not for me. I don't know, it was the last time I've heard someone mention it in the last 2 years. That's something that just came and went really quickly. And that happens with a lot of things. So understanding, the real ability to understand which technologies are going to make an impact is, I think, what puts you ahead of the curve.
That's very interesting. The idea of a technology having a sort of ideology and trying to make us behave in a particular way. Alice, do you get this? When you're creating content on TikTok or Instagram, for instance, do you have a fear? Do you feel like you're fighting the algorithm when you're being brought into Meta to hear about the latest updates? Do you ever feel this is pushing against what you want to do? Are you just learning to adapt to it? How does that play out for you?
I mean, there's all this talk about the algorithm. It's something I never ever paid attention to, and I have loads of followers. I do think it doesn't work, like it doesn't make a difference. And it's one of those things that I'm sure probably with books and writing papers and stuff, you can be like, oh, this is what's in at the moment. This is what's fashionable. Or, with fashion, you can try and predict it. But actually, all I've ever done is just make videos that I think are really good, and I put them out a lot, and I do it a lot, and that works. I have never used like a trending sound. I've never done anything that's trendy. And I think so. I think to offer the other side of this stuff. I think for me, phone use is really, really bad. I think it is a terrible thing in society. If I was in charge, I'd say everyone get rid of a smartphone. The Princess of Wales has just said this kind of campaign, and she's talking about how bad it is for children and for families. She said, parents are physically there, but they're not mentally there. When you're having lunch together or something as a family and you're all on your phones. And I do think it's a really bad thing, which is obviously a strange thing for me to say, having social media. But I would like to offer some amazing kind of strengths that I have seen from it, that I think, social media won't exist in years to come, but something else will. And I wonder if we can take those qualities. For example, if you wanted to make videos about history and talk about history 30 years ago, you'd have to have a commission from the BBC. You'd probably have to be a professor. You'd have to be something like a big name. It's probably limited to about 5 people, and they're probably all quite similar people. Today, anybody, literally anyone in this room, could just start making content. You use your phone. I've got my phone there and a recording to like a speaker. And you can just start posting on the equipment you already have, and you can be completely free. So make it about whatever you like. You can be the commissioner. There's no commissioning delays. You can be the person that decides about the money. You can decide the content. You can decide the mood, the style. You can do all of these things. And you could build a platform. You can have your own mini TV channel. And I think, actually, I don't know whether it comes into that stat that you were saying, Rachel, about younger people being less worried about it. Like, I have seen, for the people who are creators, they have built these amazing, wonderful careers out of the things that they're passionate about talking about, and older people too. And when you talk to those people, it has been the most transformative, wonderful, thrilling thing for them, opening up so many doors. I don't know if you guys know Katie Kennedy. Does anyone know who that is?
I do.
Don't worry. Yeah, YouTube. But I saw her at this premiere, and I said, what's social media been for you? And she said, it's been literally transformative. That is obviously my unusual experience, and it's not the same, and it has all these different things. And I think that's the other point, is that when we talk about social media, so often we talk about it as this bulk thing. People will just like slap it down as like AI slop, or it's just this thing, or it's taking massive tolls on mental health. And I have to say that the people who write about it in papers tend to, like, I once saw an article about TikTok by Simon Heffer. I was like, have you ever been on TikTok? Like, have you actually ever been? So I think there's a massive misunderstanding, and and lots of commentators don't probably understand how wonderful it can be in lots and lots of ways. As I say, TikTok won't exist and Instagram won't exist, I'm sure. But maybe for whatever the next thing it is, it would be wonderful if it was as democratic and freeing and creatively nurturing as what it is at the moment. So
No, I very much agree that, the people who are often criticizing social media are not the ones who are using it proactively. But I do have to say that I think we need to really make a distinction between the the kind of advantages that social media provides, like this kind of democratization, which even that we should question, because of course it has also led to the erosion of democracy through polarization. So it's a double-edged sword in that sense. But to the extent that people can bypass gatekeepers in order to produce whatever it is that they're interested in producing, that's one thing, which of course is very positive. But it's almost like, let's say when the washing machine was invented or something, like the washing machine made it possible for people to maybe spend less time washing for hand, whatnot. But imagine if the washing machine, I'm not sure if this is an analogy, but imagine if it came with like a doctrine attached to it where it said that, okay, if you wash blue clothes, then we're going to help you, then the algorithm will make sure that they get clean. But if you wash red clothes, then no, there's something like that going on. I mean, I come from a feminist tradition and I was blocked on Instagram at one point. So the algorithm definitely does exist. And I'm, far from one of the people who's getting the worst end of that stick, right? But for months, my account was just closed and I couldn't reach anyone. And it was because I had said something that apparently was too provocative for the platform. So, just because it can be used positively doesn't mean that as a whole, when we're talking about it in this sense, that we should sort of think that it could be a positive thing for society.
Yeah, and I think when we talk, like when they talk about policy and policymakers all about social media, we need to make those distinctions, because it is completely different if you're talking about politics, for example, and that kind of thing happens to you, to somebody who's just documenting their life and their gardening or something like that. And it's a completely product, is an end game, it's a different impact, and it's treated in a different way. So I feel like that, but it goes back to the point that people just don't understand it, and they don't talk about it in a way that's understanding. They talk about it as this big block thing, like young people, like social media. They always talk about me as like the TikTok historian, whatever. And it's like you obviously just see it as this like big blur. Was actually there needs to be more definition, I think, when we discuss it.
I think the word that is coming up for me with a lot of these really great comments is this sort of idea of connection. So what do we all really want? We want to connect with each other. And this is very relevant to social media, because social media can be very good for young people's mental health, because certainly some minority groups can find connection in a way on social media they absolutely couldn't have in the past. But that's not to say that connection in real life isn't sort of super important. And I think what the Princess of Wales is talking about in terms of family life, which is this idea that, we do, your point as well, Luke, that we bring ourselves to our phone, and we want to, young people want to feel that connection still with important adults, trusted adults in their lives, with their parents, as well as connecting on social media. So I think it's something to do with, we need to think more deeply and almost 3 steps back. It's like, where do we find connection with people, and how do we do that? And how do we do that as parents to truly connect with our teenagers before they even get to their phone? And actually, there are really good practical ways you can do that. One thing bit of research I came across, which I really liked, which is this idea that 9 o'clock is this golden time to connect with teenagers. If you're
in the morning or in the
evening,
as you say,
possible time. The worst possible time is sort of rushing, people trying to get to school. But 9 o'clock is a really interesting time in terms of timing, turf, tone of how we connect. And the reason it's thought to be such a good time is that you, as a parent, your sort of body clock's winding down. You may have had a long day, and your defenses may be slightly down, especially your kind of bossiness may be slightly on the down low. And meanwhile, it appeals to a teenager's autonomy, that they get to choose the timing and when they talk to you. And those sorts of very practical steps about how do we find connection before we even come to phones. So it's almost like kind of, let's go 3 steps back.
This is an interesting point. When would you think is a good time to get a phone as a teenager? Do you have a settled view on this matter?
Oh no, absolutely. And I'm glad to say that I've been writing about mental health since 2014, and we did give our children brick phones, and we did wait till they were 15. So we were good on that. We weren't very good on computers, actually, because I think in those days people didn't really understand that computers could be just as addictive, and gaming was a huge problem for teenage boys. But yes, I think clearly you want to wait as long as you possibly can. And you do need that collective action, because the mental health of an individual goes down if they're the only person not to have a phone.
Yes.
So we do need this kind of collective action and school actions, corrective action together.
And would you suggest, when you say later, you should wait a long time before you have a smartphone, do you think that we should all not, could it go very late that you never actually have one? I know, James, you don't.
No, I got rid of my smartphone.
Yeah.
I think we should ban them personally, but I don't want to.
Well, I think it's very unrealistic that people can't run their lives without their phones. I mean, teenagers need to buy tickets on Trainline, and they need to check the weather, and they need to do all the things that we all do on our phone. I think it's your earlier point is about, sort of pulling out these different strands, that it isn't this kind of huge, great one big block. There's lots of sort of different aspects to how we use technology. So I don't think it's realistic to say you can't ban your phone, but I think it has to go back in terms of more profound topics like human connection, like experience, expertise, knowledge, imagination, some of these other, and cultivating them. And so there's a very interesting thing is that what we focus on expands. So if we keep focusing on all the problems, they expand. But if we can focus on all the things that make for good mental health among young people and indeed adults, so all the things that we know are good, like being outside, play and creativity, and we know exactly what makes for it. It's almost like we spend so much time worrying that, and almost I understand why we worry. Sort of when we worry, you think we're doing something, but actually maybe just pivot the focus onto spending time on things that we know are really good for our mental health.
It's very well put. I wonder, we've got 5 minutes before we go to questions. I wonder, does each of you have a tip that you would offer about how to handle technology in your life to make it work for you?
I would say, I suppose even going back to, my own philosophy and the point that I sort of keep coming back to, which is, I would say, if you're interested in something, any kind of profession, creativity, etc., don't make the assumption that technology will get to a stage where it can do it for you. Do a little bit of the groundwork, learn the fundamentals, and then you'll be much better placed to understand how to use technology or benefit to create something extraordinary. So I think these are maybe for the people who want to be creators. If you want to be, I think the easy example that comes to my mind is a filmmaker. Learn about films and film history, and watch a lot of films and read scripts and that kind of thing to understand how it works, rather than trying to rather than thinking that you'll get to a point where you'll be able to churn out a kind of film, because even if you can, you won't understand whether or not it's good, or whether or not it works, or whether or not it's whether or not it's original or new. So learn the fundamentals, and then you can use the technology to help you. That's why actually some film directors, making sort of award-winning, Oscar-winning films on their phones, but it's not the phones that is doing the work for them. They understand that the technology is incidental. They could use a giant, camera, 8K camera, or they could use their smartphone and still make something of quality, because there's a level of fundamental understanding they have. So if you want to create and you want to use technology to aid your creation, do a little bit of the hard work to understand the fundamentals would be my tip.
Great advice. Anybody else have controlling your smartphone in your life, using it to your advantage? Any thoughts?
I mean, one of the first thing I'd say to brains to just, make sure that you own your own mind. Don't let technology sort of do your thinking for you. And then, because I don't want to give advice that I don't follow myself. So some of the things I do, which may look different for other individuals, but once a week, I have a day where I go and I sit in a cafe and do my work there, and I leave my phone at home. And that feels great. It's just less distractions and so on. I put my phone away around 9 p.m. actually. So winding down at night and having that time that is phone free. And then making time to read every single day for me, just reading, having my phone somewhere far away. So I guess ultimately, if I had to pick one piece of advice, it would be to read books, because that's a really good way of just getting away from all of the.
Very good advice.
I really like that, because you've got to know what it's like not to be on your phone, to have the contrast. So I'm a granny, and our son and daughter-in-law, they're both 30, and you check in your phone at the door. And so I do a whole day a week without a smartphone.
Very lovely.
And it's just really interesting, because if I wouldn't naturally have done that, but because I've got the contrast. And the other thing I would say is just check in with yourself and go back a few steps. So if you're on your phone, the really simple question is, how is this making you feel? And it's really interesting if you ask young people and they say, well, I feel crap after I've been on TikTok. Well, they have agency and power. How does it make you feel?
Good advice. Alice.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And I think probably the best thing to do is to literally physically put your phone somewhere else. I know it's so tempting to always check it all the time. And I think that I always feel better and haven't looked at my phone. But I also think this is, we are in the moment. If you're a young person who's creative or person of any age who's creative, there has never been a better time to be able to make films and make videos, whether that be on YouTube, whether it be feature films, whatever it might be, to express yourself creatively because of the technology. And the technology is that phones are amazing. You can buy your own drone. You can, have a mic that costs like less than £200. The potential to make top quality films 20 years ago would have cost hundreds of thousands. You'd have to get a helicopter out. And it is amazing. And I feel very lucky that I have been born at a time where you can make these videos. I'm someone I think who would always love to make films, and I would have been working at the BBC being a producer if I wasn't doing this now. So the world has opened up for people who have that interest, and if that's something that and it's combined with these platforms that then give you an audience or direct. So if you're someone who's kind of in that, there are amazing opportunities if you want to make the most of it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was fascinating. Thank you, everyone. I think we've got 15 minutes now for questions. If anybody has any questions, I think there's a microphone somewhere. So yeah, stick your hand up and the microphone will find you. We've got one there already. Is there a microphone? Maybe there's not. Maybe I've lied.
I just wonder, it seems to me a lot of the panic that's come to the is about children's smartphone use, whilst probably entirely justified, is almost a displacement of our own worries as adults about the fact that we almost have to use our phones and it's socially impossible not to. And the question for you, James, really, you've hinted in your columns that sort of the fact you don't use a phone.
Hinted or obsessively go on about, Joe. I don't read Alpha.
About that there are increasing, even over the past couple of years, more and more adults who would like to give up their phones but almost feel that they can't or maybe need. There needs to be, it's always surprising that whilst we've got all this focus on children's use, there hasn't been more of a movement about how to help adults sort of abandon their phones or to do things differently. So do you think perhaps you could use your position of influence for positive change? And I would say,
yeah, I hope so. I think what you say is totally correct. I think if we're all persuaded, as I think we generally are, that smartphones are bad for children, then why should that be particularly different for adults? I got as you say, I got rid of my smartphone. I think there was a real potentially positive future for people who don't want to live with smartphones. There are increasingly good dumb phones. My dumb phone, which unfortunately I stupidly left in a taxi, but it apparently has been found, does Spotify, Google Maps, WhatsApp. And that's kind of all, I think that's sort of all you need. You've got a laptop to find. And I think, I have this real sort of feeling that Apple and smartphone companies want us to believe that the technologies they're selling us are neutral tools. I don't think they are. They're designed to addict us because their entire business model depends on us looking at our screens. So we see more ads, so the algorithm tracks us to watch more ads. They don't mind if they destroy the entire of the rest of our lives if we're looking at our phones more. And I think there could be the potential for a movement of people who want phones that are tools, not phones that are, in my view, I think basically designed to destroy human concentration. And I sort of hope that I don't think I will ever persuade everyone in the world to give up their smartphone. I do hear from readers who've joined me in giving up their phones. And I think even a small minority of people who are prepared to get rid of their phones and live without them could be the beginning of something. But that might be wildly over-optimistic.
Do you have any, I'm fascinated by someone who's actually done that. Are there any downsides to it? Like what about when you buy a train, do you buy a paper ticket? Things like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you buy a train, you can still go to the state, buy a train. Buy a ticket for a train. If you buy a train, it's probably more complicated. You might need a spot, but you go to the station, you get the code, tap it into the machine, and it feeds you an old-fashioned paper ticket. That still exists. If I go on holiday, I have my old smartphone, and things like boarding passes.
Yeah,
It's just to try and go through an airport without a smartphone is a bit mad. And I guess that's my kind of moderate sell on this, which is to get rid of your smartphone isn't to never, ever, ever use it and abandon it completely. You can put it in a drawer, and if you've got to travel, you can use it. If there are kind of random things where you need an app and you can get it out and use it for that specific thing. But I think it's that idea of trying to treat it more as a tool than as a kind of
You're in control in that.
exactly. I agree.
But they could develop. Sorry, do you call it a dumb phone?
Yeah.
All right, yeah. They could develop that to have tickets. I feel like that's like only one off.
Yeah, yeah, they could do, and I hope they will, and I think they're getting better.
Yeah.
If anyone's interested, there's a great Reddit community called r/dumbphones where people like review them, share their experiences, and it's genuinely that's how I got into it. That was a great guide for me.
Does anyone here have one? No.
Shame on you.
Would any of you consider it? Yeah.
Very good, excellent.
There are a few things for adults. There's a new organization called Scroll Aware, which is trying to help adults get off phones as well. So I think it's happening.
How does it work? How does that work? Rich?
It's like a community group. It's kind of it's a community, a group of people who are kind of coming up with advice and support, and you team up. And one of the things is because we're so social, it's easier to do with others. I think,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
that's the sort of theme behind it.
I mean, I would back it. Like I know I make loads of videos on social media, but I would be very tempted to get a phone like that,
Join it.
which seems such an unusual step to say, really. But
But there's no reason, I guess, why your smartphone shouldn't be like a professional tool.
yeah,
It doesn't have
it's
to-
in the same way you'd upload a video to YouTube or whatever, or like a TV channel.
In the old days, you wouldn't have literally owned a BBC camera that you had to look at.
Exactly. That's what's so incredible.
Any other questions?
You spoke about transport headaches, they getting up the smartphone come. But I also wonder if there are things like maybe more so for our generation as well. A lot of like genuinely your social life can be social media, or even things like career opportunities or projects. I feel like a lot of the world for us kind of like reshaped itself around media to a point where we're generally quite a disadvantage not to have it. But at the same time, as you say, it does have these problems. So I just wonder, like, how much of a sacrifice would you say people should be prepared to make if those kinds of data are sick?
I mean, I guess I would say I'm in a relatively lucky position because I have an unusual job. I don't get sent a lot of emails, and I'm left to my own devices quite a bit, and that's not the case for everyone. I would hesitate to say that, like, if your life depends on it, don't give it up and destroy your life on a matter of principle. But I think often to give it up is to find out that you needed it less than you thought in the first place. And I think as part of the insidious design of the smartphone is that it makes itself seem more essential to you than it really is.
Have you felt differently, James? Happier?
Yes, yeah.
And what could you talk about that?
Okay.
A little bit.
I mean, I don't.
Is that the benefit, isn't it? That's surely the benefit in my mind, is that you're feeling better all the time. Isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I don't want to sound incredibly smug, but I do that. I concentrate better. My girlfriend would say that in talking to me before, I'd constantly be like, half my eye would be on my phone. I can't do that now. I mean, especially now even my dumb phone is in a taxi somewhere in Buttonisha. But I read a lot more. The thing that depressed me was that I loved reading. It was my whole shtick, and I was like, why am I on my smartphone when I should be reading? Like, who even am I if I'm not reading books? And that was a kind of major kind of motivation for me. And yeah, I think I feel a lot happier, a lot more relaxed. Just sort of feel less sort of like, that twitchy feeling when you're constantly like, it's somewhere over there and it's trying to get in my head and make me do something on it. Any other questions? Anyone else?
Do you think the government should have, or another sort of authority figure should have, more of a say of the ideology of these technologies?
It's a very good question. Does anyone have any thoughts about the ideology of smartphones and tech and whether we should control it?
If the government should have more of a say than they already do. I mean, because there are also discussions about regulations.
I guess the idea that we're giving over control to Silicon Valley, it's like somebody calls up. Who else should be controlled to?
I mean, I just think that the government should, like here in the UK and in Europe and in other parts of the world, should be doing more to regulate these technologies. But unfortunately, the opposite is happening.
What kind of regulations do you think could improve tech for people?
I don't know, because that's not my area of expertise as such, but I imagine just things like the bottom line is that our data is being used, right? And people are making a lot of money off our lives because our life are being turned into data. So definitely some kind of regulations around ownership of one's privacy and one's data. But yeah, that's not happening. So I think one of the incentives would be for us to become more aware of these questions that you're asking and to do more to campaign towards that, because the EU and Europe and the UK are now, in order to sort of meet this competition between the US and China and developing new technologies, also softening the regulation. So we're going in the opposite direction than what we should do.
I mean, there's quite a lot of work around age verification, and that's happened in Australia. And there are things that government can do around schools, which is sort of happening. And, so there are really important things that government needs to do.
And I think also potentially actually maybe role models as well. I hate not necessarily celebrities, but there must be, I think, people who that other people look up to, who are starting
Jay.
to business like Jay.
Because I think with government, I mean, in some places I would take some people are taking the approach with TikTok are just outright banning it. It's like, I think in India, right, they just outright banned it, which is a certain measure, probably one that works, but an extreme measure. But I think the reality is that I think the influence of a governmental body, of any institutional body, is somewhat limited in actually inspiring people to do certain things. You can implement certain regulations, but whether or not people are going to follow them or feel happy following them is another thing. And actually, I think one play would be, generally people who people look up to, who said, I'm trying this thing. And especially for young people who kind of, and always young, the people you look up to in the external sphere who are taking certain actions, behaving in a certain way, could actually encourage a lot more people to do it as well. So maybe approaching those kinds of people, thinking about how that can be leveraged as well, might also be something.
Reminds me that I think in China, TikTok turns off at 9 p.m. every night if you're not an adult. And I think it also plays you, if you're a kid, it plays you a certain percentage of educational content. So you could have TikTok, but it would just have more History Alice on TikTok. Everyone would win.
But they do have they do encourage certain educational content to be pushed, like STEM. There's a whole section on STEM on TikTok that they were pushing for a while. So they are kind of active in, and someone said earlier, the algorithm, like the algorithm does exist where they just decide what you see. So it's already there in some ways. That's quite powerful, that algorithm. I mean, I don't understand it at all, but I know, so, when you're on it, because you're like suddenly growing, be like, wow, I've been chosen.
See, I immediately then, when I hear that, I think of how STEM is such a male-dominated group of subjects and professions, and so even then the algorithm sort of deciding things over us, can be problematic, and it just takes away our agency. And
I mean, like, who is to say that STEM is more important than history or not? Like, either way, but that's a decision they have made. I don't know.
Boy, always
you can contrast.
It's not helpful, even there.
It's not. Anyway.
It's tricky because when you ban something, you naturally instinctively want to sometimes do it more. So while there is a place, I think I would go back to the idea of kind of looking at our own emotional regulation, our thinking styles, our social and emotional health, and the person we are before we even come to the technology. And government can do that as well in terms of school curriculum and what they're teaching.
Start banning like reading or like history content. Everything is really sexy, yeah.
I think we've got time for maybe one more question, if anyone has one final thing they want to say.
Anyone?
Yes.
I was wondering, like, to what extent you can talk about AI and technology and algorithm and stuff in a vacuum for these ideologies which are driving behind it, like, ultra capitalism and those sorts of things, and how much is really possible to ignore the effect of, for example, like the economy or like different government policies, like defunding after school clubs for children, like how much you can actually talk about TikTok or anything like that in a vacuum necessarily.
Good question.
I don't think you can, to a certain extent. I mean, these are, just like Mina said, and I'm not bother hear from her, but Google, these are profit-making companies. I mean, it is just their incentive. So you have to think to at least my first instinct is to say, well, you're being motivated by increasing the profit for your shareholders, which makes sense. Your business. I mean, it makes sense. It's not a negative thing per se, but maybe it is just the nature and the beast as well. And I think the same thing's happening in social media companies. I mean, I think the uptake in YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels is because they were trying to compete with TikTok because it was eating a large portion of their market share. So in order to bring that back, they implemented these things. It wasn't about improving creativity and all the kind of stuff that they tell us. So I think it's impossible to I think even more than being impossible to divide them, I think actually that's what you have to think of first. So what is, they're creating these technologies instinctively. What is the ideology behind that?
Interesting. Anyone else?
I guess that has been my sort of point here. But I'm going to actually contradict myself and say that, of course, there are also many technology companies and platforms that really just are passionate about creating new technologies. So we shouldn't forget that. Like, even while they also want to make a profit so that they can, stay alive, there are also more positive incentives. I think what matters is to really be aware of these conversations, because they do all have a socio-political context. And I think particularly for you all who are young people, the world today looks very different than it did for us when we were younger, and for even older generations. It's a much more complex world. And, we might want to retreat into a world where we can just think of like mono issues, but that's just not reality anymore. The environment is implicated, all of these social conversations we're having. So I do think that that's important to always bear in mind.
Yeah, brilliant. That's a great note on which to end. Thank you very much. Thank you to our excellent panelists. I hope that was illuminating and interesting. I certainly thought it was. And thank you to all of you for joining us.